Well, hello everyone. This is Mark Turi again. Welcome back to my channel at Mark Turi 123. And before I get into the preliminary sort of discussion that we talk about, which I like to call house cleaning and small talk, as I want to remind everyone, please like this video if you haven't already. And also, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'm doing pretty well as far as analytics in the past couple weeks. I have over 1,000 views now. I have close to 230 plus watch hours, and I'm sitting at about 120 subscribers. Although it doesn't sound like much, I still am very proud of that. But I could, of course, always have more. So, again, please like, please subscribe, share this if you want. And please enjoy the other content that is on my channel, including but not limited to just my lives. But of course, please go back and watch some of the videos that are on my channel. And as always, I like to say if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, just write them in the comments. And as long as you do them respectfully and you don't spam or anything like this, I'll do my best to comment and to give some feedback. And if for any reason I can't, I will be honest with you and make some links or some, guide you in a direction if I can't do that myself specifically. But I do want to thank everyone. Thank you so much. My last, I would say, 3 to 4 lives have been quite good. The last time I was here, excuse me, last time I was here, we were talking about, which was Saturday, we talked about the rise of National Socialism in Germany and so forth. So, week before last, now this time last week, we talked about confirmation bias. And then the Saturday prior to that, we talked about Germany after World War One. And I think it was pretty interesting. So, got some pretty good traction on that and hope everyone enjoyed it. Want to give a shout out here to Mischief Mono. How do you say that? Mischief Managed, of course. I thought there was an O there. I thought it was mono-ged. I was like, "That doesn't make any sense," and then, of course, I don't have my glasses on, but it's managed. So, thank you, Mischief Managed. It's awesome that you're here. Thanks for being here. I think this, hopefully will be exciting and interesting and so on. This is, of course, someone I know from Maryland's mod, so shout out to Maryland from Coffee, coffee. No, it's no coffee's first. It's Cult's Coffee Crafts, right? Cult's Coffee Crafts, and of course, I've been on her channel a couple times, and so on. Marilyn Honig. So yeah, thank you so much, Mischief. That's really amazing that you're here. It's good to see you. Yeah, before I get into my topic, which today we're going to talk about. The 3 sources of information, how to differentiate between a news source, an opinion source, and pressure groups in the media. It is coffee first, okay? Coffee, cults, and crafts. Anyway, you all know what I'm talking about anyway. Marilyn Honig's channel, she's amazing. And it's again good that you're here, Mischief. Coffee, cults, crafts. Coffee comes first. Okay. Um, And so, yeah, so we're going to talk a bit today of how to differentiate between, what is a news source, what is an opinion or commentary source, and then what is a pressure group or an advocacy group, a think tank, and so forth. And why we're going to do this is simply because of the things that I learned prior to being an undergrad. So prior to go to university, prior to that, I spent several years in junior college in Toronto, Canada, and in Los Angeles, where I studied film and media, broadcasting, journalism, and media studies, media criticism, and so forth. So I wanted to share some knowledge with you all. Thank you, Irish Mart. It's awesome that you're here. I hope everything in Ireland is good. I hope the weather's been good and so forth. I hope you're well as well. And you're always very loyal, very reliable. I appreciate your support, of course, like always, and I hope you enjoy the discussion tonight. So thank you for being here. And yeah, and so I studied the media quite a bit, and I think it's just things that could be passed along that I learned along the way. So we're going to look at how can once we come across a piece of information, how can we differentiate between what is news? So what does that actually mean? What is opinion or commentary? What does that mean? And then how do pressure groups or advocacy groups, what did they supply as far as information is concerned? And we will get into things like biases and things like this. And ultimately, we need all three. So this is not going to be one is better than the other. It's just going to be how do we differentiate and find out these different things. Before I get into that, though, I don't know what the temperature was today, so I didn't go outside today. I didn't feel like it today. So it says it was 17 degrees Celsius. What's that for our American friends? Let me just look that up. So 17 Celsius, the Fahrenheit. It looks like that is 63 degrees, which is pretty warm here, it being the end of October. However, today is also the 23rd of October, and in Hungary, it's a national holiday, so nothing was open today because today, the 23rd of October, is the 68th anniversary of the Hungarian Revolution that took place in 1956 from the 23rd to October to the 4th of November. And I just wanted to say a few words about that because it's actually a very important anniversary of my own family, and I'll just get into that momentarily. But in Budapest, where I'm living, 68 years ago, there was a student-led pro-democracy protests and demonstrations from students, from professors, and from other individuals that led to um, a counter-revolution by the Soviets, which basically drove their tanks into the city of Budapest and stopped this pro-democracy, pro-liberal revolution. And a lot of people were killed. 200,000 Hungarians fled and became refugees, many of which coming to Canada, the United States, Great Britain, West Germany at the time, um, as well as places like South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and um, Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico, like all over the world. And so it was a very much a symbol of heroicism that a grassroots movement became so popular that it almost overthrew the communist state and the communist government, but also because of the violence, the unfortunate violence that was initiated by the Soviets in retaliation. And so I'm going to just get into that, how that's important in 1 minute, because 48 degrees here by mismanaged. Yep. So 60 was 63 here today. And Marilyn, I want to say hello, Marilyn. Coffee, Cults, and Crafts. I tried to say the name of your channel before and I got it all mixed up. But coffee is first. I remember that. Coffee, Cults, and Crafts. How are you doing, Marilyn? It's so good that you're here. I appreciate everyone here. All of your support is so great. Um, I'm very, very happy that you're here. Again, thank you so much. I hope you're doing well. I hope your sons, your daughter's doing well. I hope Duncan's doing great. I still have to do, and I still will do my Deep Space Nine Dominion War PowerPoint. I also want to let you know, Marilyn, that I believe in 2 weeks I'm going to be doing a PowerPoint on Saturday on the Twilight Zone. I think if I remember correctly, you're also quite a what we call a zoner, and I'm going to look at some of my favorite episodes of the Twilight Zone and just briefly go over the cast and the plot and sort of explain why I love them. which is going to be not this Saturday, but the one after. So what is that? Let's see here. That's on the 2nd of November. I'm going to do that. I love the Twilight Zone. I can't wait to share that. Of course, I'm going to go over my favorite 6 episodes in that order, and then again go through that. Five was too little, and then I have an honorable mentions list, and I'm going to again go through some of those things, and then encourage people also to watch the Twilight Zone. I absolutely love that show. And by the way, the original, because there's been many iterations, but I'm talking about the original Rod Serling, 1959 to 1964. On Saturday, we're going to be talking about Russian minorities in the states of the former Soviet Union. So we're going to talk about Russian minorities in Eastern Europe, the Baltic states, the Caucasus, Central Asia, and so forth, and talk about some of the geopolitics, a little bit of economics of what's going on, look at some statistics, and so forth. But to bring all of that together, bring all of that back to October 23rd. Sometime after October 23rd, my grandfather was actually called in to the communist headquarters, which was in a very infamous place here in Budapest, nicknamed the Terror House, which today is a museum because previously it was also the headquarters of the Hungarian Nazi Party when the Nazis occupied Hungary. And even at that time in 1944, my grandfather was also called into that place. So he was called into that place twice. And it just so happens that in 1944, he was rescued when a group of freedom fighters and resistance fighters uh, broke in and liberated people. And then also in 56, when the students and things like that, they broke in and they liberated people. So my grandfather was in there for about a half a day, and then he ran home. He woke up my father, who was 10. He and my grandmother packed a suitcase and they walked on foot all the way from Budapest to Vienna, which is a 40-hour walk. I don't know how many miles that is. Someone could look that up. It's a long time. It took them about a week. They didn't have any food. As I say, too, also 200,000 people. A lot of people did that trip, that walking trip. They ended up crossing into the border of Austria. The Austrians were very hesitant, but they were granted refugee status. They settled for a brief period in Vienna, roughly 6 months. The Austrians didn't really want them to stay because of geopolitical matters, because, of course, Austria borders on Hungary and also bordered on Czechoslovakia. And the Austrians wanted to remain neutral, so they didn't know if the Russians would also invade them. So then a lot of the Hungarian refugees were forced to flee again. And this time, my family, my dad and my at this time close to 11 years old now, with my grandparents, still refugees. They went to Italy for 6 months. And then at the end of 1957, somewhere maybe around November, December 1957, they moved to Canada. And my father started, I guess, whatever grade that would be when you're 11, almost 12 years old, sixth grade, fifth grade, not speaking a word of English. And they lived in Montreal until 1972. And then they moved to Toronto. And then later, that's where my parents met. So, yeah, very, very, it's a day of reflection. Unfortunately, my father and my grandparents have passed away. Now, my grandmother passed away in 1990. My grandfather passed away 2015, and then my father passed away in 2020. So I think about them every day, of course, as I'm sure I'm not the only person who thinks about those, who they've lost, parents, grandparents, loved ones, etc., friends. But I really, heard a lot of these stories growing up, and as I got older, my grandfather told me basically as much as he could recall. And so I'm very, very happy to have those moments. And so again, that's why I mentioned today, the 23rd is a national holiday, which we call Hungarian Revolution Day. And I just wanted to say that because this is a very, interesting part of not just history in Hungary, but my own personal history. Hello, inappropriate. What is that? Haifa. Inappropriate Haifa. We are doing the Twilight Zone again, the OG Twilight Zone. Only seen a few of the Twilight Zone, but I'll be into that, especially Deep Space Nine. Yeah, they'll be coming out there. I honestly, between The Simpsons, The Twilight Zone, and Deep Space Nine, I mean, if you really don't want me to shut up, I could talk about that literally till I don't know next week or beyond. Twilight Zone original, yeah. Oh, it's such a great, 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 great show, and the writing was so amazing. I absolutely love the writing. Rod Serling was a genius. You know, he wrote the screenplay for the original Planet of the Apes with Charlton Heston, 1968, which is, you know, it's of course spoiled now. On it's spoiled on the movie posters and it's spoiled on the DVD, Blu-ray, VHS covers. That, of course, you know they're on Earth all along. No, sorry if I spoiled that to anyone, but the 1968 Planet of the Apes, which stars Roddy McDowall, who did a Twilight Zone episode. I don't know if anybody here knows that one without Googling. I am going to mention it in my favorites. But he wrote the screenplay to that. So he was the master of having moral stories, sci-fi, fantasy, you know, thrillers, and then in the end, the twists, which I love. So yeah, so thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. I've been having a great time here in Hungary because a lot of people love hearing those stories. When I lived in Canada and I did my undergrad in Canada, for whatever reason, every time I'd mention my family and my family's history, especially in something formal like an essay or a presentation, I would get deducted grades. But I've actually mentioned my family story. I in fact wrote an entire essay of a class I did maybe a year and a half ago, specifically on modern Hungarian history. And my final essay, which is like a 10-page paper, was very specifically on my own family's history. And of course, I had to use different references, but you know, other than my own family. But I was able to reference the fact that these were stories that my grandfather told me. So, which was very nice, and I got a an A plus. It is very I hope people don't forget. I really hope people don't forget, man. It's one of the reasons I am a historian is I hope people don't forget history, but you never know. Yep, Twilight Zone is interesting to watch as an adult after being scared, yeah. Scared out of my wits as a kid, yeah. Mhm. Well, thank you, everybody, yeah, so, I mean, this looking forward to the next couple, things, and then, I'm working on a couple other PowerPoints. Um, I'm not sure how many PowerPoints I can do between now and maybe the end of the year. I'm still trying, but I might switch format on that. And instead of doing PowerPoints just in case I can't get one done in time, I might actually just do like a lecture. And in that, I might, like share my screen and do other things than a specific PowerPoint. um, this is not really a lecture. This is just more my it's actually really just my opinion. It's just commentary. I try to add some fact, I try to add some discussion elements. So this would be more like a seminar if we were back in university or college, where our American friends would say college. Um, but yeah, because I have three I'm working on one, but I've got two completed PowerPoints and one working on it. So I think that I may be able to just switch to lectures, but I don't think that matters. I think most people just I hope you just like, you know, hearing what I have to say, um, and hearing my thoughts. So I appreciate it. So, I'll be able to find out some stuff. And then if not, I'll, figure out some PowerPoints and stuff like that. But it's about 20 after, almost 20 after. Let me get some water here. And I really want to get into our main topic now and just discuss that a few minutes ago when I was talking just before all of what I just mentioned with my family and all that. Oh well, got a friend here. We got one of the exalted few, Joe Giuseppe. How are you, Joe? My good friend Joe. As I said, my exalted high gold meritorious member. If you want to donate, that's totally fine, but you don't have to donate to get a membership. Or were you Excalibur? I can't remember, Joe. But I appreciate you being on. That's amazing. Thank you so much. It's good to hear from you. Good to see you, and I hope you enjoyed today. Good to see you again. Good to be on. But yeah, I wanted to get into some of the background. So first of all, so I'm 41 years old, and that's a fact that people look at me and they say, "Really?" I am 41 years old. I know for some of you, you'll say you're so young. Other people will say you're so old. I'm just stating it as a matter of fact because when I was 18 years old, I graduated high school, which is all the way back in 2001. And the very first, post-secondary academic program that I went into was at a community college in Toronto, where I'm originally from, one of the public colleges, so junior college, if you for our American friends, which we would call community college in Canada. I know community college is also an American term, but I went there and I studied broadcasting. And this particular program was not a 2 year like normally in the United States or in Canada. Normally, college programs are 2 years. This was a 3 year program. And in the first like year and second year, we did a lot of radio television broadcasting. In the third year, we did film studies, which was why I wanted to go into this program. So 1 year radio, 1 year TV, 1 year film. Now, eventually, some of you know that part of my Scientology story is after I left Scientology in January of 2009, I actually moved to Los Angeles. And for the next 2.5 years until the summer, so around June, July of 2011, I lived in Los Angeles, and I also studied like at what's called Santa Monica College. If you're in Los Angeles area, you might know that. Used to be called Santa Monica City College. So it's another junior college. And I also studied broadcasting, media, film, theater, like a whole bunch of stuff. I did a film studies major, but I ended up spending a lot of time doing those things, right? I took like a media studies course, a media criticism studies course. I took a journalism course, and then I spent a year in Australia when because I have family there. But I spent a year in Australia doing journalism. Unfortunately, that didn't work out, so I've had some ups and downs. And then eventually, I decided to go to history and do a different route. But I was very much into previous to getting into history, journalism, broadcasting, and so forth. So these are just things that I've learned along the way. And a lot of this comes with what is called media literacy. And I kind of find that to be a little bit of a condescending term. I know that there are people who have trouble with media literacy, but it's the literacy part that I have a problem with. I kind of think that's a very academic term and it's almost looking down. I just say that there's different types of information and that all of these types of information, whether they come from news sources, opinion commentary sources, or pressure groups slash advocacy groups, are all information, but we have to make sure that we know their motivation. And so for the first analysis, what we're going to go to, the first example is the biggest one, right? What is a news source? What constitutes a source of news? What does that mean? Okay. So when we're looking at news, unfortunately, there are also, and I'm going to get into this when I talk about opinion, there are certain organizations that have the word news in their name, but they are not necessarily, some are, but not every news source that has, or every source, I should say, that's news that has news in their name, rather, is a news source. And that has to do with licensings and so forth, which I'll get into in a moment. But what is the basic idea of a news source? Is a news source is a firm or a company, could be both public or private, in all of these cases, mainly public or private, that hire journalists and reporters, they hire writers, staff writers, editors, etc. They may have an online or a hard copy magazine, newspaper type of publishing that they're doing. They may broadcast it over television or the internet or radio. But what they're doing is when someone who is a journalist or a reporter goes onto a scene to report a story, okay, they go to the 5 questions. I'm sure you've all heard this before. Who, what, where, when, why, how. Six. I can't count. 6 questions. I'll go back and edit that. The 6 questions, okay, the W5 and the 1H. So if I'm a news source, all right, and I'm going to give you some examples here, and it's a local news source. So this is the biggest example that we give in journalism and broadcasting school. How can we discern what's a news source? So imagine you're flipping through your a local paper or you're looking at local news, and there's always going to be a story called human interest. And the biggest human interest story is when a cat gets caught in a tree. Poor Mrs. Johnson, her cat, Whiskers, gets stuck in a tree. Okay. This is very mild story. Again, it's called a human interest piece. It usually goes towards the end of an hour of news, especially on TV, to make people feel good. Okay. Um, and so what happens is who, okay, so who's involved, right? Who are the people? Well, who are the people in this case? Well, it's, Mrs. Jones or whoever I said before, and cat Whiskers. Okay. Who, what? So what's the story? The cat is caught in the tree. Okay. Who, what, where? 123 Maple Street. What? When? I have to count myself because I keep getting lost track. Who, what, where, when? When did it happen? I don't know. Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Who, what, where, when, why? Because Whiskers saw a squirrel, and this is the 10th time he's done it. And the fire marshal, who's also part of the WHO, I don't know, Fire Marshal Smith says, you know, Mrs. Jones has to do something about this cat because this is the 10th time that the cat has gone up the tree and it costs, I don't know, thousands of dollars of taxpayer money, etc. And of course, the final is the how. Well, how did it happen and so forth. So if you ever run into a story like that in your local news, television, radio, newspaper, magazine, that's basically, you know, that is basically a news story. That's pretty basic. We can take it to larger stories. We could take it to fires, natural disasters, bank robberies, crime, and so forth. But a news story, and here's where it's kind of interesting, are not just reported in at news sources. So a news story can be reported by the other two groups, including opinion, commentary, and pressure groups. But what makes a news source is that for the most part, they dedicate over 50%, over 70, over 80% of their content essentially in whatever they're publishing is focused on news stories. And so two examples, and I know that when I mention media sources, I'm going to mention two media sources that are considered the most unbiased and politically center. I'm going to mention two that are more politically left and two that are more politically right. And the reason why I'm doing this is to explain that even though staff editors and boards may have a particular conservative, liberal, democratic, Republican bend, in the end, that doesn't differentiate or what's that word? Negate them from being a news source just because people have political opinions. But if you go to Reuters and the Associated Press, Those two news sources began as essentially um, what they call, excuse me one second, began as wire services. The word wire meant Morse code. So imagine 100 years ago, or even before the telephone, or even when the telephone was existing. Let's just imagine something happens in Europe or in Africa, the Middle East, or something, and a journalist would get this information. They'd go to their nearest Western Union office, and they'd have a certain square on a form that they would fill out, and they would have to pay per letter, and they would report only the facts, only the who, what, where, when, why, and how. Like that's how small it was, because of course the outlet like the New York Times or the Times of London or fill in the blank of a very old um, century old plus newspaper or so forth would write them down, and then they would send them, and of course someone in the back had to do Morse code, and then someone in the New York office or the LA office or the London office or the Sydney office or whatever would get that transmitted and print it. And so right now, as a good historical example, Reuters and Associated Press are mainly of their news, of course, because the climate of the internet, which I will get into when I talk about opinion, they write articles that are clickbait and all this kind of nonsense. They have to because of advertising, but at least originally you can still go on there and look at the daily world news and just get the facts. So there's no political commentary. It's just the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, the how, and that's it. Okay. So that is what a news source is. Now, as I mentioned, some news sources will skew a certain way because of a corporation, because of a government, and because of its editing staff. So, two really good, and please forgive me because I really only know this from an American Canadian perspective, which doesn't really help our UK friends. So, I apologize for that. But they're also very big international news sources. But if you want to read like good news sources, that the majority of what they do is report news stories. Of course, they do other things too. The New York Times, I know it has a lot of problems. It definitely does, as all media is going through a very weird transformation again with clickbait articles. But at least traditionally, and I still think today, the New York Times is still considered one of the most trusted news sources in the world. It doesn't mean they do everything correct. It doesn't mean that they don't make mistakes. And it even doesn't mean that they don't show their own political bias. But none of that actually really changes the fact that at the ground up, they're still considered a news source. Okay. The other one is one of my favorites. Full disclosure, in America is PBS, the Public Broadcasting, what do they call it? Service. And they will do different types of journalism. For example, Frontline, one of my favorite investigative journalism shows in the States. I also like 60 Minutes and Dateline. Those are investigative journalism. Those ones, again, they tackle different issues outside of what we're talking about to expose consumer frauds or political fraud or something. So they kind of toe the line between news and opinion because obviously they have a side. But if you watch like NewsHour on PBS, it's actually quite good because PBS is funded by the public rather than the government. Where I come from in Canada, we have the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is publicly funded, which means it tends to go towards not only the people who want them to be publicly funded, which generally is on the left, but but it also tends to be a little bit more negative to those on the right because they want to pull funding from the CBC. Whereas the model of PBS, at least, is you can literally be the Center for American Progress, which is a very left wing organization, and the Koch brothers foundation, which is very, by the way, right wing, and they take money from them. All right. And so they have to kind of make the balance. They're almost forced to. And if you ever watch like a Ken Burns documentary, you will see that there are left wing, right wing, and center. There's sometimes 50 organizations that sponsor them. And with Vietnam, I think it was the Center for American Progress. Could be something else. But the Koch brothers will donate money, so they're kind of forced to find that happy medium. For the right, it can be a little trickier because I know a lot of right wing media is dominated by what I'll get into later as opinion sources. But the two really, really good ones that do, again, that are good news sources that don't skew too far to the right, the same way New York Times and PBS don't skew too far to the left, is actually The Hill and the Christian Science Monitor, both of which are news sources, both of which are owned by corporations that board members and editors that might skew more conservative Republican, etc. But in the end, there's still a news source, which means that two things are very also important to a news source. So it's not just asking the questions and reporting news stories. It's number one is accountability, and number two is objectivity. When I talk about accountability, one of the reasons why a news source is a news source is because of what's called redaction or retracting a story. So, Reuters, Associated Press, The Hill, Christian Science Monitor, New York Times, PBS, and other news sources, when they get things wrong, they don't just say, "No, we weren't wrong," and they double down on their what they thought was correct. They will redact or retract their statements, usually in papers, by putting out an entire page saying, "We reported something last week, and this is why it's wrong." They'll do the same on the radio, they'll do the same in television. And of course, there are some sources that will just dismiss those things like, "Yeah, we got it wrong, but whatever." But a really good news source, okay, will own up to their mistakes. Their editors will even print their own editorials, an editor's editorial, and say, look, you know, we made a mistake. And by the way, being humans, working in human institutions, there's always going to be mistakes because who, what, where, when, why, how, when you go to a site, whether it's the cat in the tree or a fire or whatever, you're getting the news as it's coming to you then. But a story evolves, okay? And look at how some stories have evolved. Like look at 9/11, look at certain wars, where we have earthquakes and cyclones, hurricanes, etc. Things change. And so often when you hear things first, that's just what you're reporting. It's just what you're getting from the sources at first, but things, especially in criminal cases too, come out. And so accountability is a really, really big thing in how we differentiate between news and opinion. The other one, of course, is objectivity. There's a big philosophical debate out there on whether or not human beings can be objective. All it means is that we can put aside our things that make us tick and try to evaluate the story non-partially. There are people who can do that better than others. There are people who are supporting one of the two presidential candidates right now. And, if let's say I'm supporting person A and I don't like person B. Well, if I'm not objective, I'm going to give the person I'm supporting, person A, softballs, and I'm going to be very harsh on person B, but I'm not being objective. If I'm being objective, I'm treating both of them equally. And that's honestly not that hard to do. What makes it hard to do is external influences, money, ratings, pressure, etc. And so this is why like actually good news sources right now are struggling because they need that money. They need those clicks. They we know that conflict sells. And so as we go forth into the future, I really do hope that journalism can be more objective. It's happening right now, by the way. There's a lot of good, objective, accountable news sources that we can access. I just named six of them, but there are others. Okay. And again, because I'm naming six American ones, there's in Canada, there's in the UK, there's in, Germany, there's all over the place, Australia. But what's happening is we're getting flooded with the next category, which is opinion and commentary. And my personal gripe is that a lot of those sources um, don't admit that they're actually opinion. They will call themselves news sources. And I will tell you in a moment after I answer some start questions here on what that means and how we can differentiate. First of all, Haifa, you're older than me. Okay, well, I feel better now. I'm kidding. You're a youngster. I mean, listen. I guess I sometimes do day trips with undergrads, so I feel like the old man out, as they say. 62. I think 62 is young. That's an interesting age. I think. Forget information source. Mark Turi is a source. Thank you to my exalted few, Joe DeCepo. You are coming along nicely. There will be a throne in our kingdom for you. I'm really just making it up as I go along, Joe. I don't know what's going to happen or what's going on. I know nothing, but you know what? I am a source. I'm like Hubbard. I'm the source of nothing. How about that? Pulling it out of my butt 10 times. Hey, listen, cats go up in trees a lot. I'm just saying. When we do journalism school, we have to write journalism pieces. That's part of it. And the easiest one is just to do the cat in the tree. Everybody loves that one. I was a news story for falling off a cliff into a river. I need to hear about that. Holy crow. Similar here with the news, not much editorial pieces, a lot of copying, yeah, from elsewhere and opinion. Okay, opinion, non-factual, yeah. Of course there is. And hey, Shell, how are you? Thank you for being here. It's really amazing that you're here. I I do hope everything's going well. Would the real Clearwater Chaz please stand up? Thank you, Clearwater. This is awesome. You honor us with your grace and your presence. I bet your breath smells like pizza, but that has nothing to do with anything. I just bet it does. $50. And buffalo pizza, probably. So okay, I'm after the news sources again, just to sort of make a summary. We talk about the who, what, where, what, when, why, and how. So that's the reporting of a news story. It also has to be accountable. If the source or the news company makes a mistake, it has to own up to it. To its readers, it redacts or retracts what it says. And then, of course, the other one has to be objectivity. Can at least the journalists and reporters, even though it might be hard to do in the face of money, in the face of whatever, can they and will they interview people who they like or don't like the same? Okay. Now we're going to get into opinion. I'm just going to take some water because opinion is king, unfortunately, in social media and in a lot of news sources have either switched to become mostly opinion sources, um, or they put more money into their opinion. And so, what is that? What's an opinion or a commentary source? Well, first of all, I don't want to get down on an opinion or a commentary source because there are some really good commentators out there, social commentators, media critics and commentators, political commentators that have inside information into a particular industry or a particular way of doing things. and they provide opinions to people who analyze these newses and give their opinions and perspectives to sort of break down, if you will, the information that's being reported. So, if we're talking about Mrs. Jones again and her cat whiskers, and again, this is just the easiest example, a commentator would ask, is there something wrong with the society at large? Is there something wrong with the local politics? Is it okay that, all this money is being spent every time a cat is put up in a tree? And then they're going to give their opinions. They could be political opinions. They could say things like, well, Mrs. Jones should be paying for the rescue out of her pocket. Of course, then there's the opposite side, which is Mrs. Jones is elderly, of course it should be free. And then you might have a panel of what they call talking heads, like the great British band. I think they're British, aren't they? Or American? American, British, American, British. David Byrne. Somebody tell me if David Byrne is British or American. I think he's. Anyway, I'm not going to say, but the talking heads will go on. They'll have this round table. Hopefully, there's no yelling, although now there's always yelling. There used to be more civil conversations, and they're going to talk about that. What does that have to do with taxes and local politics and whatnot? There's nothing wrong with this. In general, there's nothing wrong with it. The difference, though, is it's not a news source. So if you're commenting on local politics or international politics or whatever, if you're a pundit or a commentator, you're not delivering the news. Now, there are people whom millions and millions of people all over the world might follow because they're online, giving their opinions on the news. Their channels might be called news. They might be thinking that they're doing news. They might even call themselves journalists. And yet, that is not accountable. But there are a lot of people out there who are accountable, who will say, welcome to my YouTube channel, welcome to my TV channel, whatever, welcome to my radio show. And they'll say, this is not a news channel. This is not where you're getting your news. We're not reporting the news. What's happening is they're taking selected news stories that are either nationally or internationally reported, and they're simply giving their opinions on it. Now, I also don't want to be that guy who picks on one side. It's always a bad thing, and I don't like it to pick on people. But one of the things that I find in American right wing news, and I don't think this happens in other countries, although maybe it does. And yes, it happens on the left as well. So I'm not just picking on one side. But in America, there are three sources that are all considered commentary. And I'll get into that in a moment, that have the word news, okay, in their name. The first one is called the One America News Network. The second is called Newsmax, and it might be low hanging fruit, but the third is Fox News. If you watch these stuff, I'm not going to tell you not to watch them. If you love watching these, if this is where you do this, is not for me, no judgment here. The only thing is that in the United States of America, each of these firms have to register for a license, and they are not registered as a news source. They're registered as an entertainment channel. So that's also okay too. Who remembers the Daily Show, which is still on, right? In Canada, we had This Hour Has 22 Minutes. There has been a blending of news and entertainment and opinion news and entertainment that has gone together. Entertainment Tonight, some of these, Graham Norton's show, which is a talk show, but also they do celebrity news in the UK. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think they're not exactly news networks. They do news sometimes, Fox, like CBS, NBC, ABC, PBS, will have local stations, right? In Canada, it's CTV, CBC. I've been so far out of Canada, I can't even remember now who also has local stations that also will have, these kinds of issues. Well, they'll have a mix. But again, it's one of these things where they say that they're news in their names, but legally, as far as their license is concerned, they're entertainment channels, and they're very popular entertainment channels. They're good at what they do, but most of which, unless you're in a local affiliate, like a local Fox affiliate, which I used to watch, I think it's WNED, Clearwater Chat can, I think it's WNED is either PBS or whatever is the Fox station, and I used to get we get them in Toronto, and so, um, there's nothing wrong with this because one of the things is people have political biases and slants. And so if someone like Jon Stewart comes through and says, "Okay, this is something stupid that certain Republican, you know, president did," there's nothing wrong with that. If you go to Fox and you talk, one of their commentators, I'm not even sure who's on Fox anymore, forgive me, but they're commentating with their opinions. Rush Limbaugh did this for most of his life. His was not a news show. His was purely an entertainment show. The only thing is, do you know? Because as I mentioned also, and I want to understand this, there is left wing, opinion. There's right wing opinion, but there's also the Hill and the Christian Science Monitor, which are news sources. And yes, their board swings to the right, but they're still news sources. And yes, there are comedians on the left who do political commentary, but then there's also PBS and the New York Times. So instead of just always watching one, just branch over a little bit. And I know that can be difficult because we get into a habit. Maybe we TiVo, I don't know if that is still around, or DVR, our favorite news channel or something because it's always on. Also 24-hour news cycles. CNN is the most licensed uh, news channel in like doctors' offices and dentist offices, it's, especially in America. So I understand that it's everywhere in your face, but every once in a while, just go over and look at a news source and see what they're saying. And I understand that, people might not have time and that news has never been more at our fingertips than it has now. So it can be hard. But that's all I'm saying. Just different to and if at the most basic you can do is just differentiate, okay, I'm watching this particular show. It's on a particular network. Are they breaking down the who, what, where, when, why, how? When I do a little bit more research, is this source actually accurate? Um, are they accountable? Are they objective? And then if you find yourself that there's a political commentator that you really like, which also includes late night talk show hosts, can do a lot of that commentary, just know that there's just a difference. And if that's all you can get out of this, because it can be a very hard thing to completely interrupt and introduce different things to your news cycle, because I understand people just want to be entertained, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So do I. And I will tell you on YouTube, I have a couple of news commentary channels that I like. So there's no judgment here to say, "Oh, you shouldn't watch. I'm up here and you're down here," and you know, talking down to you. That's not true. I have political commentary YouTubers that I like, and I follow on my social media a bunch of news sources. So okay, that's all you need to do. Really, it's hard. I get it, but one of the things that this differentiation can come to is just the idea of, okay, if somebody said it in a news source, or is it someone's opinion? So it's like, is it a fact? Which, by the way, facts we can still change, facts we can still debate and discuss. Opinions are all biased, and they're mostly based on our feelings and our experiences, but both things coexist. So that's all. Just figure out which is the fact, which is the opinion, and then try to go with, you know, in some cases, the facts and the opinion might come later. Something like this. That's at least what I was taught, which is when you absorb a fact, you're still going to have a feeling about it because we're only human, but we can have both at the same time. Okay. The last one is pressure and advocacy groups. So, what we learned in journalism school, and actually, just before I get to that, sorry about that, I have 2 stars here. I want to get through. Iris says the issue I have with opinion pieces, no one needs to compare and contrast different sources to try to eliminate bias. Yeah, pretty much. Good. That's a good point. It's a good point, Irish. So Giuseppe says we have a show called Have I Got News for You, which, due to being classed as entertainment rather than news, isn't allowed to show clips from outside the HOC. Only only news shows can. Please remind me HOC. I'm so sorry, Joe. But yeah, that's probably a law in the UK. And that's because, again, the government does play quite a big role on regulation of the news and what can be discerned between entertainment. Oh, of course. Yeah, yeah. House of Commons. Yeah. We have a House of Commons in Canada. You think I know that? By the way, if you're ever in Canada and I think they're around in like the summer, which are the Canadian geese, a Canadian goose or Canadian geese. When they fly by a big flock of Canadian geese, we often call them the House of Commons. So it's a little it's a little joke there because all they do is squawk and quack. And they're horrible animals. It doesn't matter. I just the HOC, of course, not the House of Lords anymore, of course. Yes, but yeah, you're absolutely correct. And like in America, there's C-SPAN. C-SPAN is where if there's something going on in the Senate or the Congress, they broadcast that live. C-SPAN is actually, I know it's boring for a lot of people. They are really good if you like American civics. What do they call it? Maybe it's called C-SPAN in Canada. It might actually be called C-SPAN in Canada for our House of Commons is the most boring. Let me tell you guys, I have watched a few Canadian House of Commons, and exactly. Order, eh? You're being rude, eh? The Honorable O'Connor had floor, eh? You interrupted him, eh? We have Canadian geese here too. Yeah. Okay, they migrate. That's why I was thinking. I think they migrate in the winter, and then they go down to Florida. Then they people there hate them too. But yes, we often call a flock of Canadian geese the House of Commons. Um, yeah. Be more polite, eh? Wait your turn, eh? Anywho, it's so boring. Canadian House of Commons. Listen, I know that there are places where in the world where like parliament members have fist fights in the parliament or like people get killed in the parliament. That I don't want. Like, let's pick it up in Canadian House of Commons. Come on, come on. We have to be so polite all the time. Anyway, now we go on to pressure groups and advocacy groups. And the definition of this is more like groups that are usually made up of citizens or organizations, charities, NGOs, environmental groups, think tanks, social justice groups, etc. And so, what we're taught as journalists is that the differentiation between news opinion and especially the information that comes from pressure groups are all involved in the bedrock of a democracy. And so we do need news because we need to discern what are the facts and we need that accountability and we need the objectivity. we can't, we have to have opinions because of freedom of speech and freedom of expression, depending on where you live, EU, UK, Canada, America. There's always some constitutional rights. So having people express those opinions about the news, positive or critical or negative, especially on politicians and so forth, is also very important for democracy. However, an advocacy group or a pressure group that will put pressure on local and federal and international governments to when there's a war, when there's a natural a disaster, climate change, women's issues, feminist issues with minorities, poverty issues, so forth. And so when you look at these sources, they are also subject to a little bit of skepticism sometimes because it depends obviously on where the group is getting their information from. Now the point is to put pressure on the government, and so intention wise it's actually pretty good. Okay, that we have a climate crisis, I believe very strongly, and there are things that are going on with human rights and wars and so forth. So to me, there's nothing wrong with that. But one of the things that I used to do, and I don't want to give the name of the organization, but I used to when I did this in Australia for about a year, was I used to take reports from human rights group, and I used to fact check them. And almost all charities, including really good anti-poverty charities, human rights groups, even think tanks, and I'll get into think tanks in a moment, they tend to embellish their like not their actual data. In some cases, there are discrepancies, but they show the data, which are usually sourced by governments, by departments of labor, departments of energy, and then their conclusions are very biased in supporting their, you know, conclusions. It's also true that some human rights groups and bad ones and bad, environmental groups will also increase statistics and say that there's worse things going on. But why they're doing that is because they want to bring this attention to the government. So we always have to find that balance because even the people in those organizations know this is the game that has to be played. If you want to bring someone's attention to something, you have to be alarmist. One of the problems with things like climate change right now, I remember when people were talking about climate change 20 years ago, it was so alarmist and people didn't like people like Al Gore. And so, for stupid reasons, we dismissed it and now we have these issues. So, you do have to be careful. There's a lot of public relations that has to go on. But in the end, that's what a pressure group will bring. So, between all of these things, you can't always take everything without a grain of salt. You have to take everything with a grain of salt because there can be bias. There can be bias in news as well, especially when they're not accountable. A news source is just a news source. There's good ones, there's bad ones, and there's ones in the middle. There's the same with opinion, there's the same with pressure groups. So, really good news sources will give us really good information and really good facts, and the reporting will be very honest. Really good opinions will also be very honest and productive, and really good pressure groups will have not only really good intentions, but they will signal a more positive and productive way on how we can solve whatever issue that they, are looking to solve. Because of course, raising money after a natural disaster, um, there's a refugee crisis of people leaving their homes. Where do they go? They need advocacy. They need people to speak for communities, displaced peoples, and so forth. I mentioned before, I descend from displaced people in 1956 when my parents came to Canada, or should I say my father and his family came to Canada. They had charities, they had, organizations they could go to, but in 1956, it was more common for people to be very individualistic and they really didn't have anybody to speak for them. So my grandfather worked 3 to 4 jobs, and so did my grandmother. You know, it's a different world today. What I'm saying is that was a lot more harsh back then because of the advocacy was not as strong for people. Whereas today, there's a lot more going on in the world. There's a lot more services, especially even in the United States, there's a ton of services. You know, there was more than there was in the 50s. And certainly it's more egalitarian today. Well, the final point on pressure groups, I want to talk about think tanks. And just briefly, you know, a think tank is usually when a group of people get together, they're hired usually by a larger organization. And it's usually what we refer to when it comes to politics, international relations, foreign policy, and especially economics. And again, they operate very similarly because when there's a recession, there's always people who say, "We told you the recession was gonna happen and you didn't listen to us." There's people in Canada and America, whether they're left-wing or right-wing think tanks, whether it's the Broadband Institute or the Fraser Institute in, Canada, or, you know, the Heritage Foundation in America or the Roosevelt Institute in America. You know, like, they print their stuff and they do the same thing that a lot of other organizations do, which is you should listen to us because here are the problems and we're the solution. And that's a bad, those are bad ones. And the good ones just say, hey, these are the statistics. We have some recommendations. And, you know, you don't need to be so alarmist. So, anyway, in conclusion, I'm going to go through some of these start comments in a moment again, but I just wanted to again sum up everything by saying, as long as you can, you know, next time, let's say next time or even tonight, you're on social media, Facebook, Twitter, or X, Instagram, whatever. You're always inundated, always will be inundated with these clickbait articles. The best thing to do is to think about, you know, what is the source of this clickbait article? Is it something that you've heard of before? Is it a big, you know, like the New York Times? Is it an institution of media? And even if you haven't heard about it before, like, you know, there's always something like The Hill or Christian Science Monitor. If you haven't heard, you have heard of them. What are they? Are they a news source? Is it someone like doing what I'm doing? Am I just a talking head to a camera, talking to people like this? That's usually obviously an opinion. Is it someone with their name or with a character? Again, you're probably getting into opinion. And then pressure groups would be human rights groups, think tanks, charities, etc. And everything together, okay, represents a little bit and a little piece of democracy. And this is why it's good because we need the facts, we need the opinions, and we need other people to be telling us what's wrong with our society or what's wrong with a certain part of the world. So the government can create public policies that will focus its money towards a natural disaster, displaced people, poverty, etc. So all of those things are good, and that's why I say there's no shame. If I mentioned a news source that you are or are not reading or watching, don't feel bad about it. If you're only watching those 3, you know, opinion sources I mentioned in America before, you know, I'm not in control of what you consume. Just try to get one news source, you know, that's it. But even if you are, now you know it's an opinion source and that's okay too. You know what I mean? It's fine. I'm not going to judge you for that. And then with pressure groups, just they have very good intentions, but just take some of their conclusions with a grain of salt. And when you read their reports, their reporting are usually done by journalists whom they hire, who also, by the way, support the organization. So it's not that the reporting is bad, it's the conclusions we have to look at. I got to go back to the stars here, my start comments. I've got a couple here. Mike, I've never heard of a Canadian trying to do a Canadian accent. That's right, eh? It's kind of put your mouth like this, eh? And talk about hacky, eh? Just say eh a lot, eh? Eh? I trained myself a little bit out of it. You can still hear I still sound Canadian uh, a little bit, but when I lived in America for 2.5 years, I did theater classes, I did voice classes, so I've kind of flattened out a lot. And when I go back and or talk with Canadians, I can hear there what they call Canadian raisings, which I still have, but I can hear them very like they're very enunciated. I don't like Canadian racings. I want to try to get rid of all of them, but whatever. I can't probably can't do that. But that's really it's a freaking house of commons, eh? Goulash is the healthiest food ever, says doctors. Small print brought to you by the Hungarian Food Association. A to the men. Yeah, that's another thing with studies. You know, studies one week black coffee is the greatest thing for you, and the next week it's the worst. Or grapefruits and omega-3 acids. Yeah, John Oliver a few years back did a whole segment on that on his show. It was very funny. Studies suggest studies. Kind of reminds me of some of the old Guinness slogans. Guinness for strength, Guinness for health. Again, amen. I love Guinness. I love them. Love Guinness. I'll have to go to the brewery one day. And Guinness Irish counts as food. Well, it is mostly bread, so follow the money. Yep, follow the money and follow yours truly. I am the source, as Joe said. Joe quotes that I am the source, therefore I'm the source, and there's no opinion about that. It's a meal in and of itself contains iron. Oh, for us ladies, well, there you go. There you go, Irish Mart. Iron is good. As I think it was either Rod or Todd Flanders. Iron helps us play. So there you go. That's a Simpsons reference. Okay, my voice is getting a little scratchy. This is doing too much Canadian. Eh? True. I also am sauce pizza sauce. Tartar sauce is actually one of my favorites. I'm also quite a sucker for a good hollandaise. I'm just letting you know. Or a béarnaise sauce. That's another one. I do enjoy I do enjoy because I eat fish. I don't eat meat, but I do eat fish. Either a good béarnaise on a salmon or, a little tartar sauce is a good one. And now I'm hungry. Thanks, Joe. Also dips. I'm a big dip fan. Hummus, baba ganoush, all that kind of stuff. So, um, thanks, Mark, for an unforgettable lecture. Yes, me too, Stephen. Aurora borealis at this time of day, at this time of year, concentrating entirely out of your kitchen. Yes. Can I see it? No. I do steam a good ham. It's very true. Okay. This has been a thoughtful and hilarious stream. I thank everyone for being able to mix knowledge with humor, with history. And so, if you're scrubbing through, you've gotten to the end. Thank you so much. Please like this if you enjoyed my content. Please like the video. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Again, it being the 23rd of October, it's kind of a special day. So thank you again for the mix of what we did here. Humor, history, and knowledge is good. I will be back at 12 p.m., so 12 noon um, on the Pacific time zone, 3 p.m. on the Eastern time zone, 8 p.m. in the United Kingdom on Saturday, this upcoming Saturday, which is, what is the date? The 26th. And we will be talking, I'm doing a PowerPoint on ethnic Russian minorities or Russian ethnic minorities in the states of the former Soviet Union. We're going to touch on the Baltic states, Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, Central Asia, and others. We're going to talk about population statistics, relations to Russia and the countries that they're in, a little economics, not too much, but a little bit, and some geopolitical things going on. So, yes, and if anybody wants to talk Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Simpsons, or Twilight Zone, which we will do the week after on the 2nd of November. Please hit me up because I could talk about that literally for an entire day and not get bored. So, in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Or should I say, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night?